Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Hey, welcome. This is another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. On the eve of the Canadian election, and still we encourage you to get out and vote on Monday if you didn't go to one of the advanced polls. A record turnout, but we've seen that happen in the past where there has been a record turnout for advanced polling and a pitiful turnout on election day itself. Every vote matters. It really does. And there are some close races that need to be determined. And let's face it, even if, you're comfortable with the direction the country seems to be going in or not, you still have a local member, a member of parliament to elect, and that's going to be important too. So make sure you get out there and vote. As we mentioned in a previous podcast, this is when in the final days of the campaign when you really get a sense as to where people are going and their intentions and just what they're doing and to try to finalize the deal, I guess, to seal the deal, as it were. As most pundits have mentioned, and I'm going to report it here too, and I know, going to again, bothers some conservatives. There's a sense of desperation in the conservative campaign over these last few days. We talked, of course, about the fact that Stephen Harper, who is not the most loved prime minister in our history, I think that's a fair statement to say, and I'm probably not being as demonstrative as I should about that, but Harper is out there. And is it to appeal to Canadians? I don't think so, because a lot of Canadians just don't like the guy. But the conservative base will probably enjoy seeing Mr. Harper endorsing Pierre Poilievre. I don't know that it's going to have a whole lot of impact on going on because in their mind, a conservative is a conservative is a conservative. And you've seen some others too. I mean, the right-wing newspapers, the Post, the Financial Post, the National Post, the Toronto Sun newspapers, all the Sun newspapers, they've pulled out all the columnists right now and they're taking all the shots at Carney that they can and saying, that we're going to go to hell in a handbasket if we elect another Liberal government. Preston Manning comes out with an op-ed piece a couple of days ago saying that a vote for the Liberals is a vote for Western separation. I mean, come on, give me a break. Really? I mean, Preston Manning, hardly a man with a lot of credibility. This is the guy that when he was with the Reform Party, decried all this thing about MPs' pensions and the gold-plated pensions and all the money going on there. Then he gets elected. At one point, actually became the leader of the opposition, and he lived in Stornoway on taxpayers' fund. And by the way, he's getting his pension too. So, they say one thing, but all of a sudden when they're faced with that kind of money, they jump on side. The hypocrisy is overwhelming. But Manning's pulled this before, too. I mean, that was his raison d'etre when he rose to power with the Alliance Party and the Reform Party, is, that Westerners were getting a raw deal from Confederation and they wanted to leave. And time again, by the way, when they've done surveys about this in the Western provinces, the overwhelming majority of people still want to be part of Canada. They may not like the Prime Minister, they may not like some of the policies, but this whole idea of separation is really a small but very vocal minority. And of course, you got people like Preston Manning, or you got Danielle Smith, the Premier over there, and they're beating that drum because it's to their political purpose and to their political end to beat that drum. But and I'm not suggesting we be dismissive of that, and I don't think anybody should be dismissive of that. There are some concerns that need to be addressed, as there are with Newfoundland and Confederation, and Alberta and Confederation, and BC, and Ontario, and Quebec, certainly. But let's cut this crap about, then we're going to quit. Although I think Danielle Smith would she'd love to be the 51st state. But I don't think most of the population of the province that she's the premier would go along with that. But, let her go ahead and say what she's going to do. I'm sure the rhetoric does resonate with a very small proportion. And I guess maybe, just if she's lucky, she might get another invitation to go to Mar-a-Lago and go visit Trump once again, as she did before. But anyway, let's talk about more important things right now, because we are getting down to the short strokes, and the politicians, especially Poilievre and Carney, are making their final speeches and their final pitches right now. Poilievre is out west trying to shore up support because it looks as if a lot of seats are up for grabs now that were solid conservative seats in the past. And Poilievre, I guess true to form, is now maybe looking at the polls and understanding just what's going to happen on election night. And he's painting, as so many other of these pundits and conservative columnists are talking about, this very dystopian picture of what Canada would look like if a Liberal government were to get elected. He's talking about the economy crashing. Things are going to go terribly. People are going to lose their jobs. Factories are going to close up. We're going to lose all our savings. There'll be violent crime in the streets. By the way, if Poilievre got elected, that might actually happen, because he's going to rescind all the gun laws that are put in place right now, restricting the weaponry, the handguns, the illegal handguns, and the assault weapons. He's basically going to say, no, we're not going to let that happen anymore. So there just might be crime in the streets if Poilievre were to become prime minister. But this whole thing about the dystopian thing, again, reminds me so much of Donald Trump. The final days of that campaign. If you elect Kamala Harris, the stock market's going to crash. Inflation's going to be rampant. People are going to start losing their jobs. And the reality, of course, is I don't know if people actually use that as a determinant of who they were going to vote for. But Kamala Harris did not win that election. Donald Trump did. And guess what? With Trump in the White House, inflation is rampant. The stock market is crashing. They're having the worst economic crisis in the last 50 or 60 years in that country. And it's not Kamala Harris's fault. It's Donald Trump's fault. So please, think, don't fall for the rhetoric. Think about what's going on, and let's use our brains, okay, and with who we're going to put in office, because it's very, very important. I don't want to repeat a lot of the mistakes that Americans did in that past. And we have to pay attention to what's being said, certainly, and what they're doing. But we also have to understand who it is that's giving us that message. And I know I talked about Stephen Harper coming back onto the scene, much to the chagrin of most Canadians, I think, but I'm sure the hardcore love that. But Harper is sharing in that rhetoric, that a liberal government, another liberal government, is going to take us down the wrong road, and we're going to have the economic despair. That's a word they use a lot, despair. And I find it interesting because, as we've explained to you, and I think many of us know this, Harper has carved his own path since he left the job, since he got fired back in 2015. He now runs this agency called the International Democracy Union. And I'm always intrigued by these pseudo organizations, and they always use words like freedom and democracy in the title. And they're anything but. As a matter of fact, they're the polar opposite of that, because this International Democracy Union that Harper is running is basically an advocacy group for hard right-wing authoritarian governments like Orban in Hungary, Modi in India, Bolsonaro. That's the kind of politician and that's the kind of governance that Stephen Harper is advocating for. So certainly that's not, that's explaining exactly why he wouldn't want to have a Mark Carney in there. He wants a strong arm, somebody who's going to pound the fist. And basically every one of those leaders that we just talked about, the commonality there is they have all, since they got elected, have tried to erode the democratic principles of those countries. And, we don't want to see that happen in this country, but you got to know that when you listen to Stephen Harper, that's the kind of guy that he is. And that's the kind of government this guy is advocating for. And again, is that the kind of government we want here in Canada? I hope not, anyway. But it's, I guess, the question here, and we won't know until we start counting the votes on Monday, just how much of the stuff that's being flung at us now in social media sites especially is going to resonate. I'm hoping, by the way, that what's going to happen here is what we've seen in past elections. Is the lies about Carney and the rhetoric about this and the falsehood about how qualified Poilievre is to run the country, still shudder when I see that, is going to resonate with the hardcore. In other words, people that were going to vote conservative are going to vote conservative and going to believe everything that's been said. Hopefully, though, that huge middle ground, and that's most Canadians, by the way, that don't have a party affiliation, are going to make their judgment based on what we are, where we are, and who's offering the best plan to move us forward. Those should be criteria. I don't care if you voted for one party all your life. This is a different time and a very challenging time, and we need people that are going to be open-minded. Now, I got to bring this up because I read this a couple of days ago, and I'm going to refer to an article that was recently published in the Beaverton.com. Now, this is a publication that basically is political satire. It's a Canadian publication, but and have the targets have been Justin Trudeau, the targets have been Doug Ford, the targets have been any number of politicians. It's funny. It can be a little biting sometimes, especially if they're focusing on somebody who you think to be, your guy or your woman, your political leader. But there's an article there that just I was fascinated by that's in, and I'm just going to read a portion of it to you from the Beaverton, the recent edition of this. And just to give you some context, it's loosely based on, you may remember the very controversial assassination attempt, and I put that in quotation marks because I think there's some pretty strong evidence that the whole thing was a setup. But the attempted assassination of Donald Trump last summer at that outdoor rally, and we all know that we've seen the pictures of it, we've seen the video of it, and we've seen Trump with his raised arm, and fight, and we've seen the way that the Secret Service, who is supposed to be protecting the candidate, actually responded, which is totally contrary. We were told by security experts, totally contrary to the way you're supposed to act. But anyway, that's what it is. And I don't know if anything's going to come of that. But they took that as part of the premise for this article in the Beaverton and added the Canadian flavor, which is Poilievre's basic contempt for the media and his love for trying to grab attention and get the spotlight back on him. So the title of this article, and again, this is satire, all right? This is not factual, but here's the title. It says, Poilievre rushed to safety after actual journalist questioned at an event. And it goes on to say, the byline here is Calgary. During an outdoor campaign rally, security rushed to a shaken Pierre Poilievre to safety after he was tragically struck by a lone journalist's question. Mr. Poilievre was unharmed by the question, but remains badly shaken, explained a spokesperson. Our guards had swept the area for any lone wolf reporters who might try to confront Mr. Poilievre with a substantive question. But it appears that somebody escaped from that media attention. Eyewitnesses go on to report that Poilievre was in the middle of his 25th mention of the lost Liberal decade, which he often mentions, when the rogue question and the manager jumped through there to try to get through the security and ask a question. And of course, they said the security people immediately shielded him from any further journalistic danger. Poilievre himself, they say, was shaken, and he was filmed raising his fist in a gesture of support and yelling, "Fight!" And then he added, of course, "Fight any journalist who tries to ask me questions during this campaign." And again, in the interest of satire, reporters on the scene had difficulty actually capturing this whole event, given that they had all been locked inside a holding pen in the rally's overflow parking lot about a kilometer away from where Poilievre was. A TikTok video of the event depicted the incident with a question coming from an as of yet unidentified senior Canadian journalist who remains at large. The reporter's query can clearly be heard saying, "Sir, can you define what woke means beyond just this vague fear-mongering that you keep talking about?" Now, as soon as the direct question is asked, Poilievre can be seen falling on the stage, clutching his ear in agony. Any media figures armed with radically unfair questions meant to force Pierre reveal his true intentions for Canada must be dismissed and must be defended. And on it goes. But that's the satire of it. But I think it speaks to the frustration that many people in journalism are feeling about Poilievre. And this, of course, is based on the fact that he does not allow any journalistic course on his campaign plane. He doesn't, if at all, answer questions. Selected people are allowed to ask questions, and they're all basically stock answers and things of this nature. And the media gets awfully frustrated, and the Canadian public should get frustrated by these sorts of things. But good on the Beaverton. I back in the radio days, I used to have reporters from the Beaverton on from time to time. And again, it's to poke fun at the people in public life, certainly, but also, good satire, and this is good satire, is also to make you and me aware of what's going on and to open our eyes to some of the duplicitous behavior of some of these elected officials, some of the hypocrisy as well, and open our eyes to it. Now, some people are just not going to understand that. And, because they're so ardently supportive of Poilievre or somebody else who may be the center or the focus of some of the satirical attempt. But as the old saying goes, there is no one so blind as he who will not see. And that seems to be what's going on politically in this country these days. People don't want to hear the facts. They just want to see something or hear something that substantiates what they already feel, no matter how untrue it might be. And that's not really the kind of foundation. As a matter of fact, it's a very shaky foundation for the kind of democracy that we think and we need for this country. So good on the Beaverton. Thanks for that. And to you, take it for what it's worth. You can laugh at it. You can get angry about it, but just channel that energy, whichever it is, positive or negative, into voting and being a part of this process coming up on Monday. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks, as always, for joining us. You can catch us on Substack, Spotify, Apple, certainly on YouTube and on Blue Sky and so many other different platforms. Keep the comments coming. I love the dialogue that's going on. We're back, of course, with more as we start to get some of the election results early next week. But in the meantime, think about it, talk about it, and be part of the process. Thanks again to Madeline Kelly for the great work producing the podcast for today. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.